The Ballerina Sanite Armas turned out to be an unexpected hit, which was liked not only by the audience, but also by critics, especially since the picture is a spin-off of the already legendary John Wick, where Keanu Reeves himself. Look, by the way, let's not delay and go straight to the spoiler-free review, because we have a lot to talk about. In general, after the announcement of the spin-off with a female protagonist as the central character, disputes began among fans as to how justified this was. We all know how many studios follow trends in an effort to please everyone. Snow White, Dark-Skinned Severa Snow, Captain Marvel, and a bunch of other projects in which unpopular trends have won. However, as for the Ballerina, you can exhale here. The authors managed to masterfully beat this controversial moment, laugh it off with irony, and also explain the heroine's fighting style and some techniques against enemies who are clearly stronger than her. Of course, it was clear from the trailers that we were looking at a female version of John Wick, who destroys enemies in packs. But at the same time, Eva doesn't feel like a superhero. She gets tired, gets injured, and sometimes gets lost, not knowing what to do in a given situation. This makes every encounter seem plausible in terms of the character's feelings. Perhaps the main question that interests many is whether Ana de Armas could become a replacement for Keanu Reeves. The answer is not as clear-cut as it might seem. Outshine John Wick, who has become a legend even within the franchise, is a priori impossible. However, Eva has become a worthy successor. Ana de Armas is already being called the main action star at the moment. We can definitely confirm that this is the case. Like Keanu Reeves, she performed most of the stunts on her own. The plasticity, the movements, the emotions that she gives out during the fight, all this makes you watch and worrying about her character with double force. Eva is not a replacement for John Wick, but she brings a new experience that benefits the franchise. And if the authors have plans for a sequel, we are ready to look at it for a few more parts. As for the action, this is the strongest and most stylish side of the tape. Since the first film, John Wick has established himself as an old-school action movie, where instead of high-tech CJ, practical effects, stuntmen, and main characters are used, who perform most of the tricks themselves. In this regard, the Ballerina fully corresponds to the spirit of the original. The action in the film turned out to be vivid and memorable, but most importantly, it is versatile. We won't be shown gunfights of various kinds for 2 hours. Of course, there are more than enough of them in the picture, but the directors need to pay tribute, because they manage not to overdo it with them. Eva constantly uses the environment and improvised means, especially when it comes to close combat. In addition, the scriptwriters deliberately deprived her of the opportunity to use a pistol or a submachine gun in several episodes. Thus, they wanted to emphasize the heroine's ability to adapt to the environment, but in fact, this is a clever move to make the action more diverse. As a result, we got about a dozen scenes where the main character is literally cut and packed with atypical weapons. In the trailers, the most memorable thing was the use of a flamethrower, especially when Eva went up against him with a hydrant. This scene is also one of the most vivid in the film, but it is preceded by another battle with a flamethrower, which literally came out of some anime straight to the screens. Moreover, it does not last 2 minutes for show, but 15 minutes, and the directors did not skimp on beautiful shots at all. Everything is sparkling, blazing, the stuntmen are on fire, the characters are on fire, and the music is so good that the scene is really impressive. In its effect, perhaps, it can be compared to the fourth John Wick, when Boogeyman used a shotgun with igniting cartridges. At least, the Ballerina is not inferior to him in terms of tone, active use of fire, and atmosphere. In general, you can talk a lot about the action. It turned out to be inventive and non-repetitive. If Baba Yaga used pencils and books as weapons, then Kikimora used plates and skates. You have to give credit for that, because when it comes to action scenes, the Ballerina performs everything at a very high level, as if she had absorbed the best incarnations of John Wick. Surely, the participation of the creators and directors of the Chad Stahelski franchise contributed to this. If you remember, there were rumors during production that the spin-off had undergone significant reshoots. Many even managed to write down the project in failures, because allegedly everything was so bad in it that they had to call Keanu Reeves. However, it later turned out that Baba Yaga was in the script initially, and Stahelski only helped with the staging of the final act's combat scenes. Now it's safe to say that it did the film good. The final third of the film is almost entirely a 40-minute action film, with short breaks for conversations. You can feel the scale of the production, see the camera spans and camera angles, and the scenes include dozens of stuntmen. That's why we love the John Wick franchise on a grand scale. represented in Ballerina. Therefore, the reshoots were needed to set and polish the action, not to remake the film from scratch. But to be fair, the spin-off didn't turn out quite as you'd expect. Films about John didn't stand on ceremony at all for the plot and the origin of the character. We learned most of the facts about him as the story progressed, and the Russian Rama didn't appear at all until the third film. It turns out that the franchise began with the murder of a dog and revenge for it, like a snowball that covered the main character's world. By the way, the Ballerina even manages to joke about this in one of the scenes. But the spin-off chooses a completely different path of character development. The film, in fact, is the story of Kikimori's formation since childhood, and that the most interesting part of those who watched criticizes him for this, while the other praises him on the contrary. However, if we evaluate the project as a whole, then the original heroine does not benefit the film. Ballerina wants to become more than just a spin-off of a popular franchise. She strives to be independent and stand out from the background of the original films. To do this, the authors needed to write a clear story with an understandable main character, the motivation of which is clear to us. Eva Macaro is just such a character. The first third of the film is entirely devoted to her formation. In this part, the Ballerina introduces us to the new face of the franchise on the one hand, and on the other shows how her students were trained in Russia. Previously, we had only glimpsed the stages of preparation, so it was interesting to look at it from the inside. The Continental series was supposed to do the same thing, but with hotels. The authors were going to show us the internal structure and life of the inhabitants and employees. However, it didn't turn out very clearly, which is why many people missed the series or quickly forgot about its existence. The Ballerina sets the accents thoroughly, and so that we don't get bored in the first 40 minutes of the film, she shows us a cameo by Baba Yaga, a cheerful opening scene, and generously sprinkles the mythology of the franchise. By the way, the spin-off is a bit guilty of this. Beautiful allegories, philosophical overtones, and Slavic myths are certainly beautiful, but in some places they went a little overboard. This does not affect the general perception in any way, so we will not focus much on this. Another distinctive feature of Ballerina came as a real surprise, because the project brought a lot more humor to the franchise than it had before. Moreover, these are not direct punches and jokes below the belt, but subtle, quick inserts, which mainly manifest themselves in action scenes. As for the musical accompaniment, everything is also on the same level. The original films always used upbeat music that perfectly matched what was happening. In Ballerina, I can't say that there is any memorable theme that you want to listen to after watching, but the soundtrack is well chosen. The scene in the club stands out especially when the showdown takes place under the drum and bass. When watching, you even involuntarily want to shake your head to the beat. In general, there are no questions about the film's soundtrack and sound design at all. Of course, I would like to say separately about the appearance of Keanu Reeves. John Wick has his own role in the plot, which will manifest itself at the very end. However, I would like to say thank you that they showed us not just a cameo, but gave him a couple of short, but still fighting scenes. The opportunity to see all those rolling and staggering movements again was a nice addition to the film. In general, if you are a fan of John Wick, or just love stylish action movies, then Ballerina is one of the most prominent representatives of the genre at the moment. Thanks to what the original heroine was shown to us, it's not even necessary to know what happened in other parts of the franchise. The film more than makes up for it. Of course, it can be criticized for its simple and linear plot, but do not forget that the franchise generally began with the murder of a dog. Therefore, such remarks are not justified. Perhaps the only place where the spin-off sags is the main villain. There was so much talk and warning about him throughout the timekeeping that expectations were raised by themselves. In reality, it turned out to be a little easier than it seemed. However, the overall viewing experience was still as positive as possible. Now it remains to wait and see how the film performs at the box office. According to Deadline, the budget of Ballerina is $90 million, which makes the film the second most expensive in the franchise. The main reason why the film has become so expensive to produce is due to its extensive reshoots. On the other hand, it is not known what kind of tape would have turned out initially if it hadn't been for them.